Los Angeles, 1995. It's 2:47 in the morning. The city sleeps, but danger doesn't. A deserted parking lot on the edge of an industrial district. Flickering streetlights cast long shadows across cracked asphalt. The air carries the scent of motor oil, cold concrete, and something else, anticipation mixed with fear. Jean-Claude Van Damme sits in the back seat of a black SUV, his hands cuffed in front of him. But if you look closely at his face, you won't see what you'd expect. No panic, no desperation, no pleading in his eyes. Instead, there's something that his captors completely misunderstand: absolute calm. His breathing is steady, controlled, almost meditative. His eyes are half closed, and to anyone watching, it might look like resignation. But that would be the biggest mistake they could make. Because Jean-Claude isn't giving up, he's calculating. In the front seats, two men talk in low voices. The driver keeps both hands on the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. The passenger is on his phone, speaking in hushed, clipped sentences that suggest this isn't his first time doing something like this. "Yeah, we got him. We'll be there in 30 minutes. No complications." He hangs up and turns to look at Van Damme through the gap between the seats. There's contempt in his eyes, the kind of look that says he's already won. "You're awfully quiet back there," he says, his voice dripping with mockery. "The famous action star, the big tough guy from the movies. Tell me, how does it feel to be completely powerless?" Van Damme doesn't respond. He simply returns the man's gaze with those steady, unreadable eyes. The silence itself becomes an answer, though not the one his captor expects. The driver chuckles, a sound without real humor. "I think he's scared," he announces, glancing at his partner. "All that tough guy stuff on screen, and look at him now. Just another actor playing pretend. When things get real, they all fold the same way." The SUV slows down, turning off the main road onto a narrow side street. Ahead, a massive warehouse looms in the darkness, its windows either broken or boarded up. This is the kind of place where screams go unheard, where people disappear without anyone asking questions. The vehicle comes to a stop in front of a rusted metal door. The engine dies. In the sudden silence, the only sound is the wind rattling a loose chain somewhere in the darkness. But here's what they don't understand, what they can't possibly know. Jean-Claude Van Damme has been preparing for this exact moment for 30 years. The passenger gets out first, circling around to open Van Damme's door. "Get out," he commands, stepping back slightly. Even with the handcuffs, even with his false confidence, some part of him remains cautious. Van Damme steps out slowly, deliberately. His movements are smooth despite the restraints. He's wearing a simple gray sweatshirt, black track pants, and running shoes. Nothing special, nothing that screams movie star or martial artist. To anyone passing by, he'd look like just another person. But if you knew what to look for, you'd see it in the way he plants his feet, in the way his center of gravity remains perfectly balanced, in the way his shoulders stay relaxed yet ready. A third man emerges from the warehouse, younger than the other two but somehow more dangerous. He's carrying a wooden baseball bat, tapping it against his palm in a rhythm that's meant to intimidate. He walks toward Van Damme with exaggerated confidence, circling him like a predator examining prey. "So this is the legendary Jean-Claude Van Damme," he says, his voice thick with sarcasm. "Bloodsport, kickboxer, universal soldier, all those movies where you beat up dozens of guys without breaking a sweat. Tell me something, movie star, what's your plan now?" Van Damme watches him carefully, his trained eyes taking in everything. The way the young man holds the bat too tight, which means he's more nervous than he wants to appear. The slight forward lean in his posture, aggressive but unbalanced. The way his weight shifts. He's fought before, probably won a few street brawls, but he has no formal training. He's predictable, readable, vulnerable. "Inside," the young man commands, gesturing toward the warehouse with his bat. "Move." Van Damme walks toward the entrance, his captors following close behind. The warehouse interior is exactly what you'd expect: vast emptiness punctuated by random debris. A few rusted oil drums stacked in one corner. Broken wooden pallets scattered across the concrete floor. A single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting harsh yellow light that creates more shadows than it eliminates. This is a place forgotten by the world, which is exactly why they brought him here. The three men position themselves around him, forming a loose triangle. The driver pulls a knife from his jacket, nothing fancy, just a simple switchblade but deadly enough in the right hands. The man with the phone crosses his arms, watching with the detached interest of someone who's seen violence before and expects to see it again. The young one with the bat moves it from his palm to his shoulder, settling into what he probably thinks is a threatening stance. They all look relaxed, confident. After all, Van Damme's hands are cuffed. He's just an actor, probably spent more time with makeup artists than actual fighters. This is going to be easy, quick, maybe even fun. And that's when everything changed. Van Damme closes his eyes just for a moment, just long enough to center himself, to feel his breathing, to connect with something deeper than fear or anger. When he opens them again, something has shifted. The look in his eyes is no longer passive observation. It's active preparation. "What are you doing?" the young man with the bat asks, suddenly less certain. "Praying. That's not going to help you, old man." But Van Damme isn't praying. He's simply becoming fully present in this moment, accessing 3 decades of training that his body remembers even when his conscious mind might forget. His weight shifts almost imperceptibly. His feet move into a wider stance. His knees bend slightly. His handcuffed hands may be restricted, but his body, his weapon, is completely free. And that body has been forged specifically for moments like this. The young man makes the first move, probably trying to assert dominance before his own nerves betray him. He swings the bat in a wide arc aimed at Van Damme's head, a powerful swing, but telegraphed from a mile away. Van Damme's response is so quick it seems almost casual. He shifts his weight to the left, the bat whistling harmlessly past his ear. In the same fluid motion, his right leg comes up in a perfect side kick, aimed with surgical precision at the young man's kneecap. The sound of impact echoes through the warehouse, a sharp crack that might be bone or might be cartilage, but is definitely something breaking. The young man's scream is immediate and genuine, his tough guy facade shattering along with his knee. He crumples to the ground, the bat clattering across the concrete. The man with the phone is still processing what just happened when Van Damme turns toward him. "Wait," he manages to say before lunging forward, trying to grab Van Damme in a bear hug. But Van Damme doesn't try to use his cuffed hands to defend. Instead, he pulls his head back, avoiding the man's attempted headbutt, and drives his knee upward into the man's solar plexus with devastating force. The air leaves the man's lungs in a single explosive gasp. He staggers backward, hands clutching his stomach, trying desperately to remember how to breathe. The driver with the knife is more dangerous because he's more committed. He comes forward with purpose, the blade extended toward Van Damme's throat. This isn't a wild swing. This is someone who knows how to use a knife, how to threaten with it, how to kill with it. Van Damme steps backward once, twice, appearing to retreat. The driver gains confidence, pressing forward, thrusting the blade again. But this time, Van Damme doesn't retreat. He moves forward into the attack, raising his cuffed hands to deflect the knife arm. The metal handcuffs meet the blade with a shower of sparks, and in that split second of contact, Van Damme pivots his entire body. His leg sweeps up in a spinning back kick, his heel connecting with the driver's jaw with the force of a sledgehammer. The driver's head snaps to the side. His legs give out. He falls like a puppet with cut strings, unconscious before he hits the ground. The knife skitters away into the shadows. 3 men, 3 threats, 3 seconds. Van Damme stands in the center of the warehouse, his hands still cuffed, his breathing still controlled, his eyes still alert. This isn't luck. This isn't movie magic. This is the result of asking himself one question thousands of times over 30 years. What if my hands weren't available? And then spending those 30 years answering it. Now here's the detail you can't miss, the part that makes this story more than just a fight scene. Van Damme's power in that moment wasn't the kicks he threw. It was the decades of preparation that made those kicks possible. Brussels, Belgium, 1975. A 16-year-old Jean-Claude stands in a small, cramped martial arts dojo that smells like sweat and discipline. His instructor, a weathered man with scars on his knuckles and wisdom in his eyes, asks him a question that will change his life. "Jean-Claude, what would you do if your hands were taken away in a fight?" The young Jean-Claude doesn't have an answer. He's been training in martial arts for years, but like most practitioners, he's focused on perfecting his hand techniques, punches, blocks, strikes. His instructor continues. If your hands are disabled, you fight with your legs. If your legs are disabled, you fight with your head. If your head is disabled, you fight with your will. A fighter is someone who holds a weapon, but a master is someone who becomes the weapon. From that day forward, Jean-Claude incorporates unusual training into his routine. He practices kicks with his hands tied behind his back. He works on balance with his eyes closed. He develops power while standing on one leg. Other students look at him strangely. Some laugh. "Why are you training like that?" they ask. "That's not realistic. That's not how real fights happen." But Jean-Claude doesn't answer them. He just keeps training, keeps asking what if, keeps preparing for scenarios that might never happen, except they did happen, in a warehouse. In 1995, when three men thought they had him trapped. Hollywood, early 1990s. Van Damme is now famous, his movies playing in theaters around the world. Success would make most people comfortable, would make them ease off the training, would make them rely on stunt doubles and special effects. But Van Damme doesn't choose comfort, he chooses discipline. Every morning at 5:30 a.m. he wakes up. He runs. He stretches with the kind of flexibility that seems impossible for someone his size. Then martial arts training. Then choreography practice. Then gymnastics and acrobatics. People ask him, "Why do you still train so hard? You're a movie star now. You can afford the best stunt team in the business." His answer is always the same. "A stunt double can perform movements for me, but no one can prepare for me except me." And so when that night came in 1995, when he found himself handcuffed in that warehouse with three men who thought they had every advantage, his preparation became his liberation. The young man with the shattered knee is still on the ground, groaning, clutching his leg. The man who took the knee to the stomach is against the wall, slowly recovering his breath, his face pale with shock. The driver lies motionless on the concrete, alive but deeply unconscious. Van Damme walks slowly toward the young man, kneeling down to look him in the eyes. His voice, when he speaks, isn't angry or triumphant. It's almost gentle, like a teacher correcting a student. "You made a fundamental mistake tonight," Van Damme says quietly. "You saw these handcuffs and you thought, 'This man is powerless.' But the handcuffs didn't limit me. They only limited your perception of what was possible." The young man stares at him, pain and confusion mixing in his eyes. Van Damme continues, "Your problem is that you believed what you saw. I prepared for what I couldn't see. You looked at my hands, I used my legs, you thought I was just an actor. I've been a martial artist since before you were born. That's the difference between us. Not strength, not size, preparation." He stands up, walking toward the warehouse door. In the distance, police sirens are approaching. Someone must have heard the commotion, must have called 911. Help is coming. Van Damme pauses at the door, turning back to look at the three men one final time. "I want you to remember something," he says, his voice carrying clearly through the empty space. "And I mean really remember it, because this lesson might save your life someday. The situation you're in never truly limits you. What limits you is how prepared you are for that situation. Tonight you were unprepared. I was ready. That's why you're on the ground and I'm walking out of here." The police arrive minutes later, finding Van Damme standing calmly outside the warehouse, hands still cuffed, waiting patiently. When they remove the handcuffs and ask him what happened, his answer is characteristically simple. "I was prepared." But you won't believe this. The real story is just beginning. Several hours later at the police station, Van Damme sits across from a detective, a man in his 50s with tired eyes that have seen too much and believed too little. He's read the reports, studied the scene, interviewed the three men who are now in the hospital and in custody. "Mr. Van Damme," the detective says, setting down his notepad, "I've been a cop for 28 years. I've seen a lot of things that don't make sense at first. But this. Three armed men, you're handcuffed, and somehow you're the one who walks away while they're all injured. The young one might never walk properly again. How?" Van Damme meets his eyes directly. "I spent 30 years preparing for something I hoped would never happen. Tonight it happened. The preparation mattered more than the situation." The detective leans back in his chair, studying Van Damme's face for any sign of bravado or false toughness. He finds neither. just calm certainty. You know what most people would have done in your situation? The detective asks. They would have panicked, begged, maybe tried to run, but you fought 3 men with your hands cuffed and you won. That's not normal. Normal is whatever you prepare for, Van Damme replies. Most people prepare to be victims when they're restricted. I prepare to be dangerous regardless of restrictions. That's the only difference. The detective shakes his head slowly, something like respect entering his expression. Those 3 men, they've done this before. Kidnapping, extortion, assault. They picked their victims carefully, people they thought were easy targets. They saw a movie star and thought you'd be soft, scared, useless without your stunt coordinators and special effects. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. Van Damme allows himself a small smile. Neither did I until tonight. You can train for 30 years, but you never truly know if that training works until the moment comes. Tonight was my test. And I passed because I never assumed I wouldn't need what I was learning. The detective closes his notepad. You're free to go, Mr. Van Damme. We'll need you back for statements and probably testimony, but you're clearly the victim here. Self-defense, no question. He pauses, then adds, Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Were you scared, even for a moment? Van Damme considers this carefully before answering. Yes, fear came, but fear doesn't have to mean paralysis. I felt it, acknowledged it, and then I used it. Fear sharpens your senses if you let it. It makes you present. The question isn't whether you feel fear, it's what you do while feeling it. The story spreads quickly through Hollywood, though Van Damme never publicizes it himself. Within days, martial artists around the world are talking about it. Within weeks, it becomes a legend, with people adding details and embellishments that may or may not be true. But the core truth remains. Jean-Claude Van Damme, handcuffed and outnumbered, defeated 3 armed men because he had spent decades preparing for scenarios that most people never even consider. 6 months later, Van Damme is teaching a private seminar at his training facility. 30 students, all serious martial artists, all wanting to learn from someone who's proven himself not just on screen but in reality. Near the end of the session, a young student raises his hand. Mr. Van Damme, everyone knows the story about the warehouse. Can you teach us what you did, the specific techniques you used that night? Van Damme shakes his head gently. I can teach you the techniques, yes. Techniques aren't why I survived. Preparation is why I survived. Asking what if is why I survived. Training for scenarios I hope would never happen, that's why I survived. He pauses, making eye contact with each student. Every single one of you trains with your hands free in good lighting on flat surfaces with partners who follow the rules. That's good. That's necessary. But if that's all you do, then you're only preparing for the best case scenario. And life specializes in worst case scenarios. Another student asks, so we should train with handcuffs. You should train with the understanding that everything you rely on might be taken away, Van Damme answers. Your hands, your vision, your balance, your weapons, your strength, everything. And when those things are gone, what remains? That's what you need to develop. That's what saves you when nothing else can. He walks to the center of the training floor. The handcuffs didn't teach me anything I didn't already know. They just revealed what I had already built. For 30 years, I asked myself uncomfortable questions and then trained to answer them. Most people avoid uncomfortable questions. They train what's easy, what feels good, what looks impressive. But survival doesn't care what looks impressive. Survival cares what works when everything else fails. The seminar continues, but now with a different focus. Students pair up and practice techniques with artificial limitations. One hand behind the back, eyes closed, standing. On one leg against multiple opponents. It's awkward, it's frustrating, it's exactly what they need. At the end of the session, as students are leaving, the young man who asked the first question approaches Van Damme. Thank you, he says. I've been training for 8 years, and tonight was the first time I realized I've been preparing to win. You taught me I should be preparing to survive. Those aren't the same thing. Van Damme places a hand on the young man's shoulder. Winning is what happens when conditions favor you. Surviving is what happens when conditions don't. Train for survival and winning takes care of itself. 20 years later, that young student, now a respected instructor himself, tells his own students about the night Jean-Claude Van Damme taught him the most important lesson of his martial arts career. Not through a lecture, not through a demonstration, through a story about a warehouse, 3 men and a pair of handcuffs. The real power, he tells them, wasn't in Mr. Van Damme's kicks, even though they were devastatingly effective. The real power was in the 30 years before those kicks, when he was asking questions nobody else was asking and preparing for situations nobody else was preparing for. He pauses, looking at his students, some young, some old, all eager to learn. So I'm going to ask you the same question his instructor asked him 40 years ago. What would you do if your primary weapons were taken away? Not theoretically. Actually, what would you do? The students look at each other, uncertain, uncomfortable. Good, discomfort is where growth begins. Starting tomorrow, the instructor continues, we're going to spend 1 session per week training under limitations. Restricted hands, limited visibility, uneven surfaces, multiple opponents. Improvised weapons. All the uncomfortable scenarios you hope never happen, because hope isn't a strategy. Preparation is. This is the legacy of that night in 1995. Not just one man surviving a dangerous situation, but an entire philosophy spreading through the martial arts community. Prepare for the worst, and you'll be ready for anything. So here's the question that matters. What are your handcuffs? Not literal ones, but the limitations you've accepted without question. The things you tell yourself you can't do. The scenarios you avoid preparing for because they're uncomfortable or unlikely. Maybe you're brilliant at presentations when you have your slides, but panic when the technology fails. Maybe you're confident in your job when everything's going well, but fall apart during a crisis. Maybe you're a great parent when your kids cooperate, but lose control when they don't. Whatever your limitation is, Jean-Claude Van Damme's story asks you one question. What if you prepared for that limitation instead of hoping it never happens? Because here's the truth that night in the warehouse proved. The situation you're in doesn't determine your outcome. Your preparation for that situation determines your outcome. Van Damme didn't get lucky. He didn't rely on movie magic or superhuman abilities. He simply spent 30 years preparing for a scenario that finally happened. When those handcuffs clicked shut, they didn't limit him. They revealed him. 3 armed men looked at those handcuffs and saw victory. Van Damme looked at those same handcuffs and saw another Tuesday. Why? Because he'd trained for this, prepared for this, built himself for this. That's the power of asking, what if, and then spending years answering it. That's the power of preparing for scenarios you hope never come. That's the power of understanding that limitations are only limitations if you accept them as such. The handcuffs were never the story. The 30 years before the handcuffs, that was the story. The unglamorous training sessions, the awkward drills, the uncomfortable questions, the scenarios that made him look paranoid or excessive. Those were the real power. When you're being tested, it's too late to prepare. You can only reveal what you've already built. Jean-Claude Van Damme at 2:47 a.m. in a warehouse in Los Angeles revealed 30 years of asking, what if, and refusing to accept easy answers. What are you building right now that will reveal itself when your test comes? Because it's coming. Maybe not handcuffs in a warehouse, but something, some limitation, some restriction, some scenario where everything you normally rely on isn't available. And in that moment, you'll discover whether you were preparing to look good or preparing to survive. Van Damme chose survival every day for 30 years, in ways big and small. In training sessions nobody saw and questions nobody applauded. And when the moment came, he was ready. Not lucky. Ready, that's the difference. That's the lesson. That's the story. You are not limited by your circumstances. You are limited by your preparation for those circumstances. Everything else is just details.